LD Comics is a women-led Welcoming to All forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sarah Lightman and Nicola Streeton as Ladies Do Comics, today LD Comics is run by a committee of published graphic novelists: Rachel Ball, Emma Burley, Lou Crosby, Wallace Eates and Nicola Streeton. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
Hello everybody, thanks very much Emma. I am Myfanwy Tristram. Just to say, please do enjoy this bright coloured slide while you can, because I'm about to take you into a very, very monochrome project. Thank you very much to LD Comics for inviting me, and thank you for everyone who came along to listen, and a special shout out for my friendly local comics meetup, Cartoon County, who are having a watch party in a Brighton pub tonight. So I'm going to talk about my work in progress, The Noisy Valley. And Emma's asked us to begin our talk by reading a few pages so everyone can hear my voice, which is slightly ironic for this piece because it's actually not, strictly speaking, my voice that you'll hear. It's a documentary comic and everything's based on direct transcriptions from interviews that I've done. So I'm going to read it to you, but it won't exactly be my voice that you hear. It will be the voice of this lady, Catherine Edwards, who told me about when she went to the Greenham Common Peace Camp as a young woman. And you might not know, I have to say I didn't, that the Women's Peace Camp at Greenham Common actually began with people down in South Wales. In 1981, they marched up to Newbury on foot, where there was a military base that would be the site for storing Trident nuclear missiles for the United States. So let's hear directly from Catherine. She says, I think I'd finished my O-levels, as it was then, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. But of course, then I had to change the world, right? We found ourselves on our way up to Greenham, crushed in the back of a Ford Fiesta for 2.5 hours. You know, as I say, I'm a working class kid from the top end of the valley. And then finding yourself a part of something that has really amazing energy. Arriving at Greenham to find this kind of circus of folk and experience, all women, Quakers, vicars' wives, hippies, Buddhist monks, and everything in between. We all came together to do something in common, and that was really liberating. And then you can see the women sitting around. There's a Buddhist monk there with a bald head saying, so you see, she's stirring a pot. The woman with a baby. When you really think about it, two ladies holding a big pot of soup. Coming through, ladies! And then the one with dreadlocks is saying, missiles are just big willies. Another one, it's bullshit patriarchy, just like everything else. Yeah, sister. I mean, I'm also a gay woman. Being gay and growing up in the valleys in the 80s was a very difficult task. And you know, when you went to Greenham, none of that mattered. There's a joy and freedom about just being able to breathe differently when you're around people like that. Obviously, we were there to stop crews coming. I mean, that was our initial drive. But it was also about all the other conversations when you get together with women of different backgrounds. Everything opens for you and your perspective changes about your view of the world and where you fit into that. That was really quite remarkable, just coming together with people. We spoke about what it was to be a woman, the power of that. There were lots of older women there, women in their 60s, 70s, and I found them really inspirational. I was 18, so I was young and flexible. But living like this was very uncomfortable for the older ones. I didn't have, the level of discomfort that these women did to be there. And yet they did it. It was an incredibly intense experience, We were absolutely driven to make that change. There was no space for anything else. It did kind of consume my life, certainly for 2 years. We were there to make a point. And obviously, we could have chosen not to go to prison, but that was part of our mission. We wanted it to have as much visibility as possible. And so that's what we did. We went to prison. So I was 18 and I was in prison, and it was particularly unpleasant. Not everyone felt that way. 3 hot meals a day, hot and cold running water. It's luxury compared to the camp. But I didn't like it. That stuff I found really horrible. It was a completely new type of challenge for the police. We'd gone from being maybe in the small hundreds to being thousands of women, either there or aware of it. So that's part of Catherine's account. And I will say this is the first sort of documentary comic that I've ever made. And I found it really interesting using somebody else's voice as a script. They sort of phrase things in ways that you would never think of yourself if you were writing a fiction comic. And I really like including all the different phrasing and wording that really helps personalities to come through. So yes, The Noisy Valley is a collection of true stories of protest from the Rhondda Valley in South Wales, and it's in comic form. And I'm a bit torn between saying there are 10 stories or 12 stories, because there are 10 sort of standalone stories, but then there are 2 stories that are woven into the introduction as well. So it depends how you count it. And to set the scene for anybody who doesn't know the area, and I must say I didn't know the area at all until this project began a couple of years ago. The Rhondda is probably best known for the miners' strikes of the 80s. And if you've seen the movie Pride, you'll have seen the landscape too. So it's big, deep green valleys with towns and villages nestled along their bottoms. And I looked up the meaning of Rhondda on Wikipedia, and this is what it said. Many sources state the meaning of Rhondda as noisy, although this is a simplified translation without research. So it was a bit dismissive, but the more I thought about the Noisy Valley, the more I liked it. And that became the title of the project. And here's a picture of me the first time, well, not me, I'm in that orange Jeep. The picture of the orange Jeep transporting me along the valley the first time that I'd visited the area, and I had never seen a landscape like it with these deep green hills. And as I say, most of the project is monochrome, but when it came to this is like a double page spread. I really wanted to get into the colours there. And this is how the project all began. So basically it was a story of one thing leading to another. So my previous project was this book, which I self-published, and this was all about the right to protest and how it's being eroded in this country. So I don't know how aware people are, but various legislation has gone through over the past couple of years that have cracked down on people's right to protest freely. And over the past few years, I've been really interested in whether comics can change people's minds about big political issues. Not with angry illustrations or the kind of political cartoons that you might see in the papers every day, but by just gently showing a different worldview. And for this book, the core of it is 50 illustrations. I actually did them as part of Inktober initially. And these are all pictures of people protesting with a selection of banner slogans. And the basic idea is to give inspiration to people who might be setting off on their own march and can't think what sort of banner they want to include. And these are all slogans that I found online, and I thought they were really effective or funny. And I really kind of love placards and slogans, because I think the ones that make you laugh are probably the ones that carry the most weight, because they're the ones that you'll go away and remember. And then for this book, in between the pictures of placard holders, it also looks into some of the big protests of our time, like Extinction Rebellion, and actually embraced the base, which was at Greenham Common in 1982, when thousands and thousands of women linked arms and went right around the missile base. And it includes information like advice on how to stay safe at protests and how to make an effective banner and so on. And so I self-published that book, and a short while later, I heard from a small gallery in the Rhondda Valley who emailed to ask whether they might exhibit my pictures from the book. And I'd never had a solo exhibition before, so I absolutely jumped at the chance. I will just say that because the book started off as an Inktober project, I'd only ever imagined that it was going to go on Instagram. And so all the pictures, I mean, fortunately, I had drawn them all to like a 300 DPI, so they blew up okay, but they weren't enormous. So the pictures were like a 12-inch square, and that was about as far as we could push it. But anyway, the Workers' Gallery in the Rhondda Valley, that's how I got to know the amazing Gail and Chris who run it. It's a kind of cultural beacon in a little village in the Rhondda, and they really, really champion graphic novels and comic makers. And that building that you can see there, it used to be the village library, and then when it was closed down, Gail and Chris basically did everything they could to buy it up, and they now run it as this wonderful place where, if I'm right, I think I'm right in saying there isn't much cultural going on in the surrounding area, so it really is a very valuable asset to the village. And not only do they provide a programme of exhibitions and art activities for the local area, but they also take them to people who aren't managing to get down to the gallery. So they've got this electric cargo bike, that scale you can see there. They load the exhibitions onto the back and they take them out to places like old people's homes and groups for people with dementia. So anyway, while my exhibition was on, I thought, oh, I'll make a little comic just to accompany it, nothing massive. I thought I'd just put up a few posters and invite people to tell me their stories of protest. And while I was down there, I thought, oh, I'll make a really quick, scribbly zine. And I remember on the way down, I was a bit nervous that nobody would have any stories of protest and it was all be a bit embarrassing and I'd have nothing at all to draw. And as it turns out, this was entirely the wrong thing to worry about because it's the Rhondda, and that's where the miners' strike happened, as I say, and it has a really proud history of protest. And of course, Welsh people have a long, long history of storytelling. So as it turned out, the issue was not finding enough people to tell me their stories. It was about whittling it down to a manageable amount. And the Workers' Gallery were extremely helpful. So they helped me set up interviews and select the people with the most interesting stories and the ones that were most firmly rooted in the Rhondda. And this is a picture of me interviewing one of them in a cafe. So I ended up interviewing some people face to face, some of them over Zoom, one of them even in Twitter DMs, and one nice person had a podcast where he'd been telling his story and he just said, oh, just use the transcript from that. And so whichever way we did it, I would record the interview and then use a special app to transcribe it. And typically, you know, people had a lot to say and all of it was really, really interesting. So I would end up with a really long transcript and I had to make some hard decisions about what to cut out, but always trying to sort of stay on topic. So pulling out the threads that are about protest, making a story that is both coherent and interesting for the reader. And then once I had a script, I would send it back to its subject, because I think that's the stage at which you want them to come and like point out anything that's not quite right. You don't want them to be doing that after you've drawn a lot of beautiful pictures. So any changes happen at that point. And I would also ask them for photographs of themselves, and especially where they were telling me a story from a long time ago. And I did a lot of research on places like Google Street View, which is amazing for drawing, actually, to see the places that they were talking about and make sure that I was depicting them accurately. And some of the stories are really big, like the one about Greenham. And some of them are smaller, but I feel like they still mean a lot when you think about the meaning of protest, I suppose. So there was one story where somebody was talking about doing a sit-in at their school, just her when she was a schoolgirl, but it was still, um, a real person sharing their memories about the time that they felt strongly enough about an injustice to create a protest. And I thought I would just include a picture of process. So on the left, you can see there that I start off with sort of fairly scribbly sketches. And actually, that's one of my neater scribbly sketches. Quite often, I'll draw each panel separately on a different piece of paper, and then my scanner has been playing up recently, so I've just been using my phone to take a picture, upload it, and then patchwork it all together. But it doesn't really matter because that's just a guide. And then on the right, you can see what it looks like when it's finished. So that's all done digitally over the top. And I wanted to set the scene before launching into the stories of my interviewees. So actually, I am a character in this story myself. It starts off with me traveling to the gallery and experiencing the landscape and the area for the first time. And I remember it so distinctly. It was 2022. It was the hottest summer on record, and everyone was on strike. And as I've put there, that summer, it felt like everything was falling apart. It really did. And we'd been through Bristol on the way to first Cardiff and then down to the Rhondda. And it was at the same time that Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss were there for their leadership hustings. And we all know how well that turned out. And the climate protesters were out in force to meet them. So it really felt like protest was in the air and it was everywhere. And then on the right, you can see me meeting Chris and Gail at the gallery for the first time. So I'm just very, very quickly going to go through the stories that I've depicted. You've already heard some of Catherine's story, so there she is, top left. Then there's Patrick Jones, and he pitched in with a protest against a waste processing plant that was situated in the valley. And I think it's quite interesting what he said. The powers that be just discount us, slap things there, recycling, open cast, get rid of meadows, build a road. It's not in the richer areas of Wales that these things happen. And he worked with the folk singer Martin Joseph, who's very well known in the folk world. And they adapted This Land Is Our Land by Woody Guthrie. They changed the lyrics to suit the cause. And then this one you've just seen, this was Jenny McClelland, who protested against the development of ancient meadowland. So she sat with a friend who had locked herself to a gate with a D-lock around her neck. And she's in her 70s and she'd been law-abiding all her life. But she says she set out in full knowledge that she would probably be arrested, which she was. She was very brave about it. But I think probably was quite a traumatic experience all in all. There's Jill Evans, and she was a councillor and an MEP, and she told me about a landfill site that had poisoned the water and how People Power got it closed down. So that was just a great demonstration of how local people came together and actually forced a change. And then this is Claire Gwilliam, and she showed me how traditional crafts are blending with the new digital world. So she used cross-stitch on a banner and it makes a QR code that actually leads to their Twitter page. So when people are marching behind them in a long march, they can point their phone at the banner and go somewhere useful to find out what to do next. Christine Bowen told the story of a friend who had protested that she couldn't see the office Christmas tree from her desk. Which sounds like a small protest, but it was actually about how women in the office were looked down on as being just typists at the time. And she said, actually, when they listened to her, it really did bring a change. There was Tracy Leonard, who told me what she remembered of her dad being part of the miners' strikes. So she was only a toddler at the time. But she's gone on to become a photographer who specialises in protest, and she says, I'll be wherever I can get the best angle, really. It's important to record protests, whether you believe in the cause or not. If I pick and choose which I go to, that's not a fair reflection of what we're living in. That's just what I think is right. John Geraint is a professional storyteller, and he was kind enough to let me use one of his accounts from his podcast. He was remembering a protest from his youth against closing down the local hospital at Llanapia, which means magpie's nest in Welsh. So I've drawn the magpies there. And here they all are from his memories, singing a version of It's a Long, Long Way to Tipperary with the words changed to reflect how far the local people would have to go to get to the next hospital if their local one was closed down. So they're singing, it's a long way to East Glamorgan, it's a long way to go, it's a long way to East Glamorgan, and the roads are awful slow. Goodbye, Llanapia, farewell, Partridge Square, it's a long, long way to East Glamorgan, you're dead before you're there. Then there was Maria Lalick, who staged the one girl protest that I mentioned in her school. She wanted to take geography O-level, but she was put in the lower group to do the CSE. And she especially wanted me to depict her with her bushy eyebrows because, as she says, success is not only reserved for pretty people. And then David Hearn, who you might have heard of, he's a Magnum photographer. He lives in the Rhondda now, but in the 70s, he was a press photographer who photographed the Aldermaston anti-nuclear marches. And he was generous enough to let me use his iconic photographs of the anti-Vietnam marches as well. And then finally, here's Catherine again, basically saying everything that I want to say with this entire project. It's about what ordinary people do, because what we do is quite extraordinary. So The Noisy Valley is nearly finished. I just want to make an epilogue for it to mirror the introduction and just anchor it in current events. That's it really. Just to say, if you like the work, please do say so on social media. That's something that you can do for free for any artist when you hear them speak. And it really, really helps us to reach a wider audience. And I put my Patreon URL there if you'd like to keep up to date. I do post quite a lot openly, so you don't actually have to subscribe or pay. You can just follow along for free. But if you want to read all of the comics, I think that's like the middle tier, which is just like a couple of quid a month, so it's not massively expensive. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
My name's Anna Trench, and this is my work in progress, Florrie. And as Emma said, it's a queer historical graphic novel about love and women's football, set around the FA's 1921 ban. It actually begins with Florrie's great niece making a discovery. So I'm going to read the opening few pages to see what that discovery will be. Did we only not know because we'd never asked? When we cleared out for the last time, there were some things we expected to find. And there were some things that were more unexpected. But there was one thing that surprised me most. It didn't just surprise me, it hurt. Every bank holiday of the 90s, I'd been there, wearing the shirts I'd saved up for, practicing, watching, studying. Why didn't she tell us? Why didn't she tell me? So the story of Florrie is discovering that that Florrie was a footballer in the earlier 20th century. And after this sort of prologue, it then launches into her story. But I'll tell you a bit about kind of why I wanted to write this story and how it came about. So I play football, and I've always loved football. That's me in my Man United shirt. In the 90s, I had a different shirt for every day of the week with my brother. And that's me playing 11s with a team that I'm part of. I'm pretty sure we just lost a match, but as you can see, we're really happy and we had a good time. So I really like playing football, and I always, because I really like comics and graphic novels, I wanted to create a story about football, but I just couldn't kind of work out where to start, or what kind of story to tell. And there's so much of it that I love. Like I love being outdoors on muddy, crater-filled pitches, and everyone cares so much. It's so intense, it's so passionate, and there's no one actually watching, but we're all really into it. And then we're in the pub afterwards picking mud and blood off our knees, and just it's this like this really sweet shared passion. And you meet people and you make friends, and people you'd never meet necessarily in other ways. So I was wondering kind of how I could make a comic about them. I couldn't quite work it out. And then in 2021, I was thinking about 1921, and I was thinking about the kind of the pioneers of women's football 100 years ago. And in 1921, there was this band, the
Not
FA.
washing up.
Sorry.
Don't worry, Anna. I think someone unmuted themselves accidentally. Carry
on. There were these, they were like the pioneers of women's football 100 years ago. And the picture underneath me is of the Didcot ladies and St Helens team in 1920 playing a match, and 53,000 people went to see them, with 15,000 people waiting to get in outside. Just shows the scale of it, and that's why the FA banned it. And I actually started Florrie before the Euros, which the Lionesses won in 2022, but it was because of COVID. It was actually the year before, but anyway, it was then. And as I was continuing with Florrie, I really saw how popular women's football had become, and how proud everyone was, and that, I guess, that kind of also galvanized me to tell this tale. But yeah, Florrie isn't a real person, but there were lots of Florries. So when I was also trying to sort of think about what story I wanted to tell, I was looking at these incredible old pictures of these teams. There's dozens and dozens of them, and a lot of them wear these stripy kits. It wasn't just Didcot ladies who wear these stripy kits. There were lots of them. But also, when you look closely at these pictures, they're just so intriguing. Like the Atalanta Ladies FC, which is on the top right, there's a nun. Why is there a nun? And there's a little kid. And then in the other ones, you've got sort of women which almost seem like coaches on the side. And a lot of these teams, most of these teams would have begun in the munitions factories in World War One. But they carried on after the First World War. So in 1920, there were like 150 of these teams, and they had leagues, and they had this Munitionettes Cup, and it was so popular. So I just thought, what would it have been like for them, right? It would have opened up all these new worlds, and it would have been such an incredible experience. So I started imagining a character, and that was Florrie. I'm going to read a few pages. And it was interesting listening to what Myf was saying about things being political. And I do think of Florrie as a political story as well. But similarly, it's I guess it's almost like a domestic sense of the political, rather than a huge sort of the main politicians. It's rather the effects of politics on everyone. The crowds were getting bigger. The competition was getting tougher. My missus wanted to come, but who'd make dinner? Ladies' football match, Holt Harriers versus Walworth Staines ladies. It's certainly an unnatural spectacle, but one ought to see for oneself. I hope that speedy winger's playing again. Florrie! And then this page is from the beginning, so I'm sort of switching back in time, I'm afraid. She was my great-great-aunt, but I called her Florrie. She would have been 19 in 1921, the year the FA banned it. This is a quote from the announcement from the FA at the time. The Football Association. Complaints having been made as to football being played by women, the council feel impelled to express their strong opinion that the game of football is quite unsuitable for females and ought not to be encouraged. For these reasons, the council requests the clubs belonging to the association to refuse the use of the grounds for such matches. So when the FA made this decision, it was partly about them policing women's bodies and this idea that football was too strenuous for the female frame. And that kind of using sport to control women by banning them is obviously happening now. So now the Afghanistan football team, they had to flee the country to play football because they weren't allowed to play anymore there. Then you think about Spain in August winning the World Cup, and it's not their performance on the pitch that becomes the biggest news. It's the way in which a man takes advantage and abuses his power by kissing one of the players. So football and women's football is so political, and the FA are also in a mess in terms of enabling non-binary and trans players to take part as well. So football was political then, and it's political now, and I think that's especially the case personally with football for women. I'm gonna now tell you another side of Florrie. So it's a political true story, but it's also a love story, and it's a queer love story. And just like I kind of was waiting for a time when I was sort of ready to make a comment about football, I also was kind of waiting to feel ready to tell a story that had a sort of a queer romance at its heart. And then it's kind of come together with Florrie. So Florrie falls in love with someone called Vivienne, who she plays against in France. And at the beginning, we see kind of the sort of paraphernalia that's discovered in these boxes that hints at these secret histories and these love affairs. There's a postcard from Paris. I'm going to translate it rather than try to speak French. So it says, "Florrie, I love you. I'll never forget." And then I discovered this this German lesbian magazine called Die Freundin, which I'd never heard of before, which is amazing, in the 20s. And also there's a card there from Shakespeare and Company, from the bookshop in Paris. And I think that the kind of the literary lesbians, the literary modernist lesbians are well known, like Gertrude Stein or Sylvia Beach, who ran Shakespeare and Company. But obviously there would have been loads of queer people around, and I kind of wanted to explore their stories as well. There was a lesbian club in Paris called Le Monocle as well. So I feel like those stories still aren't told enough, and I really wanted to to kind of explore that with Florrie. So she goes beyond Norfolk to Paris, and her love affair with Vivienne kind of spans Europe. And in the middle it says, "And the questions kept on coming." And then there's a picture of two players kissing. But I've actually made that into a kind of romantic gesture, but I actually do think that the often female captains would just kiss at the beginning of matches, but I just couldn't resist adding something extra. And then the final paddle was just a wordless, final page, just wordless, and just kind of shows, I guess, that, my graphic novel is actually just a really soppy romance. And you can see that there with the two characters. I'm now going to share a couple of pages from a different point. So when Florrie starts playing, she basically goes running and she sees these women play football, and she's really intrigued, but she thinks it's not for her until the rather overbearing character, who's the goalkeeper, kind of woos her for the team, and Florrie starts playing and she absolutely loves it. So she realizes that there's so much that she enjoys playing in this team. So I'm going to read these couple of pages. "So to Florrie, even a loss, you need to defend, also felt a bit like a win. Post-match autopsy ails on me. The Mermaid. Freehouse. We're not linking up enough. Jean doesn't pass. So the top attacking player can't receive the ball past the final defenders. Got it? Thanks, Uncle Tim." In addition to wanting to get Lily to explain the offside rule to a fisherman there, I also wanted to show the sort of the joyfulness of a team all being together after a match and just dissecting it and just chatting. And I also wanted to show that this wouldn't have been that unlikely, but 10, 20 years before, it would have been completely unthought of. I think World War I opened up these opportunities for women so they could be in previously male spaces like pubs. as well. So last thing I'm going to say about Florey is just a bit of sort of my process. Something I've quite enjoyed is having little references just to amuse myself, really. So when Florey scores a free kick, she celebrates like Megan Rapinoe, and one of her goals, the composition is taken from Chloe Kelly's winning goal in the Euros. But also, I found these old films. There's a couple on the BFI. They're only a few minutes long, but they show women's matches at their time, like actual real footage. And I think they're incredible. I found them, so just amazed to watch them. So I've kind of, just included that as well. The way I draw is just pen on paper, really, really simple. And something that also with Florey that was different to some of my previous work, I love reading comics and graphic novels that use panels, but with Florey, I actually haven't used any panels, and I personally felt quite liberated by that. It was a bit of a surprise to me, but I've quite enjoyed it. So that's Florey. I just wanted to end by mentioning something that I'm working on at the moment, which is it's some illustrations of these really strange, sinister stories called the Mortimer stories that Christopher Isherwood created, this sort of fantasy world that he created with his friend Edward Upward in the sort of 20s when he was a student. And they are for Corpus Christi College in Cambridge, and they're exhibited there at the moment. But what I also quite liked about them is that they're also set in the 1920s. So I've kind of really immersed myself in that world. Although in Florey, there is not a man in an opera hat with a pet black serpent, but it's a kind of different world. But I've enjoyed it as well. And I just thought I'd show what else I'm working on. Thank you so much for listening. That's it.